Marky Mark, you did an awesome job on that Vegas thing, and I'm excited to bring you another doozy. This gig is for a local yoga shop that has a pretty nifty social media marketing campaign going on. They want to take footage of their yoga instructors and comp them into weird locations so that they can contrast that with their beautiful studio. The cut's attached, you'll see what I mean when you watch it. Now, the key here is to make it feel totally believable, and I'm guessing you're gonna have to do some rotoscoping. No need for handles though, the edit is locked, and we need you to work in 1-to-1 ratio so this can be used on social media. Thanks, Clive. Oh, P.S. Can you remove the microphone from her waist? Yeah, I know, fix it in post.
Once again, as a starting point, we have a Premiere Pro edit to check out. Let's do that now.
Yeah, you could do yoga here, but we think you'd like it better here.
Wow, somehow they're right. I don't know. I mean, yoga in the subway right there on the platform. It looks really good, but geez, I'm not sure. What we have in terms of work on this one is really, really simple. There is a foreground and a background. It's A over B. And if you look at this, the editor already did a remarkable job. I mean, they are within a pixel or two of where we need to be. And I just want to check out how that was done. So the talent was actually facing the other way. And if I go in the effect controls, I'm going to see this is called flopping the shot, at least in visual effects land. I don't know anybody else who uses that term. In Premiere, it seems to be called horizontal flip. And then there is a bit of scaling positioning going on. And then there's this color key effect, which appears not to be terribly sophisticated. And so I'm thinking we've got a shot in After Effects of improving on this. Over here in AE, I hope you don't mind, but I have already done a little bit of groundwork. So my thing with Roto is do as little of it as possible. Now, that's not how everybody feels, but everybody, even who loves doing Roto, is still going to agree probably shouldn't work on frames or areas of the frame that you don't need to. So what I've done is garbage matte around just the area where things are actually happening in the frame. It's not just white. And I trimmed the clip a little bit so that we don't end up working on these last 10 frames, which seems insignificant, but when you find yourself masking frame by frame, that could be hours. So we don't want to go there. So here's the comp with the garbage matte. It's just a mask. It's a term you're going to hear me use probably again. There's no horizontal flip effect, so I'm just scaling it negative 100% in X. And I've scaled it and positioned it here. Now, I don't know if you're aware of how effects order works in After Effects, but transforms like this come at the bottom of the stack, so they happen last. So if I mask or add an effect to this layer, that's going to happen first, i.e., that's going to happen at 100% scale. And that's good because when it comes to things like hair detail, even though it seems like an insignificant difference, that could end up looking a lot better. So now the question is where to get started. All right, now we know this lesson is all about Roto, and some of the more dedicated Roto artists I know would just get right in there and start rotoing. Now, that's not my style. We're gonna get plenty of Roto in this lesson, believe me, but first, I always look for other opportunities. And in fact, we even changed out the exercise for you guys so that yours also would potentially give you some other opportunities besides just straight ahead Roto. We don't want to get too discouraged. So I'll talk about that later. Right now, let's talk about some of the other approaches. So procedurally, there's Roto Brush, which is both procedural and manual. And we've already kind of taken a look at that. Keying is more of a purely procedural approach, although it's never just one button. But in this case, with her on white, we could do what's called a luma key using the extract tool. So we'll take a look at that. And then on the tracking side, we can use tools that will at least help kind of track in the basic motion of the scene, even if we end up having to roto it. And for all of that, we're going to be getting into Mocha, But first, before we even do that, let's eliminate the possibility that we could just use something much easier. So we're going to start with the roto brush, which probably isn't going to work, but it's worth a try because if it works at all, it could save us a whole bunch of time. Initially, that looks really good. So granted, the hand, we're never going to get that better. And to just prove that to you, let me size this down and try to subtract out that detail there. And now we lost the finger. We try to go back and we're just chasing our tail. Not to mention that if I go to an adjacent frame, it's not really going to hold steady. So let's forget about the hand and freeze the rest of what we got so we can look in terms of the comp in real time. Now, one thing that kind of bugs me with RotoBrush is it said it just pre-rendered 40 frames. It said that was a 40 frame span, but I'm going to set the beginning frame right here and go shift page down 1, 2, 3, 4. Even if I go back a frame, those aren't rendered. So I have to go back 2 frames. I don't know why that is. But that's a small concern. The bigger concern is how good a matte is this. We know that this matte is 80 to 90% done. She's pretty well selected. But we also know that the only thing that really matters here are the edges. That's really the whole ball game. And if we look just at the edges, say in this area down here, I don't like what I'm seeing. And specifically, I don't like that for no clear reason, they are changing their width kind of constantly. So that right off the bat sets alarm bells that if I were to do this by hand, that would never happen. It wouldn't slip around like that. And I don't really have direct control over that with RotoBrush. Likewise, if we zoom in on the upper part of the matte where she was better lit, the matte gets very chattery up there. Things like her face detail and what's along the top of the body here, just not holding up very well. Now we know we've got these pretty sophisticated tools to reduce chatter and so on. The thing that's bothering me here is that there's chatter. And so at this point, I would be relying on automated tools, the matte tools that we already saw in RotoBrush, basically, to solve that. I'm not comfortable with that. That is relying too heavily on tools that can break or look good for a while, and then you see them in the actual thing, and they don't work. And then that is a bad situation to be in. So let's switch it over and let me show you the opposite extreme. Let's take a look at an example I did a few years ago, a little short film that actually relied on straight up roto. That was achieved, believe it or not, with extensive masking roto done in After Effects. And it looks like this. So this is what you call fully articulated roto, and I realized the masks weren't quite keeping up with the image there. That's what it looks like in motion. And down here in the timeline, you can see that each mask has its own name, and it is on its own kind of keyframe pattern, although one thing we'll learn is that motion happens in arcs, so you can pick specific points on arcs and actually get a lot of good in-between frames. He's making a nice arc with his body there, so we got all those nice in-between frames in there, whereas certain layers at certain points are moving in opposition, and that's what happens with the body. And so articulated roto is referring to limbs. So it's referring to limbs that move in opposition to each other at times, or maybe in sync, but slightly different directions. And the reason to separate them like this is, if you just imagine you try to do all of this with one mask, and for example, look at all the gaps that open and close, and where do those points go. His arm, for example, is foreshortened there in the back behind the body, and certain layers, like his left foot, don't need as many keyframes as a layer such as his torso and that flapping shirt. Now, why was roto used on the shot? Well, let's take a look at the source. So initially, he's a good jumper, and he did get off the ground. But to get him to clear a car, we need to raise him up a few feet. We're raising him up over the exact background where we shot it, but as I said before, the devil's in the details, right? So all of this detail down here doesn't at all match where he's going up here. So it's kind of like close but no cigar. And therefore, we had to get really exact.
Don't panic. We're not going to be doing it that way. Not exactly that way. We're going to have some assistance with a little bit of tracking to get us kind of into it. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about rotoscoping.
I'm sure you've heard the expression, cheaters never prosper. When it comes to roto, forget about it. Cheat all you can. The first thing to check out logically with a shot like this would be, how well can I key it? And for what's called a luma key, where you're not color keying it, but you're just getting rid of the lighter background, or darker, that would be using keying extract. And you've seen this one before. Let's just get rid of the background. This is going to be a quick take. Go to the point where we start to see holes in the center. Notice there are more holes toward the top, again, because she's top lit. I'm just going to add some thresholding. Let's solo this layer and take a look just at the matte. And yeah, you see some holes in there. But where you see holes up here, we've got good edges down below. And even against black, there's only a little bit of white matte line. Now, that's kind of interesting to me. If I turn this off, notice there's a black matte line around her the way it was shot. And I think that's just her casting a shadow on herself underneath, but that effectively means there's a white and a black matte line that will have to be dealt with on the shot. Regardless, looking just at the matte, let's say that we can take care of the torso and everything above it separately, and let's just focus on what we want to get out of this. Similarly, I'm going to do the matte and the feet that are on the mat in a separate pass. So right there, I'm pretty happy with this as just a quick luma key. And it has the advantage that I didn't have with RotoBrush, that it is very consistent in terms of what it's doing here. So it's very crunchy right now. We're gonna wanna soften it, but that's okay. Now remember, the big advantage of RotoBrush is the set of matte tools that come with it. And you might be thinking, well, if only I could use those matte tools here. And in fact, you can. And this is a thing that's not commonly known. So while I could feather, soften, and choke this matte, and there are ways to do it, I'm gonna cut to the chase here. And under matte, choose Refine Hard Matte. Now, at the default setting, it's not doing a lot, but mostly what I'm interested in is a bit of increased feather. I'm not going to boost it a lot, just from the default 2 to maybe 3. And I'll shift the edge in just maybe 1%. Just choke it that much. Again, let's just see. The before and after showing I'm being a little too subtle here, so let's go further. I'll go too far initially, and then we'll see where that takes us. Now remember, I could have added more thresholding here in the control, but that's not making as big a difference either. So that's taking care of those matte lines, and it's also taking care of kind of the noisiness that was there in that detail. Now I'm at 1600%, so I'm very zoomed in right now. It's worth looking at these over a variety of backgrounds, light and dark, because the background that we're going to, it's predominantly light. We can take a look at that as well. And over that light background, I do see the dark matte lines a little bit more. Now remember, because I'm using this tool, I also have decontamination. And so let's just look at that map. So let's say that I want to increase decontamination, and interesting, if I go really far with it, they'll disappear pretty much altogether. So I can actually erase those matte lines without changing the border at all. So that's before and after. Let's just look a little bit of that in motion. And again, we're just looking at from the waist down, mostly at the legs. To me, that looks pretty amazing, actually. So while I could have reached this with Roto, I'm going to take it. Zooming in here, I do see a flaw, and I think I know immediately where that came from. The Refine Matte tool is going too far and clumping things up in these gaps. And the adjustments that I made, if I want to check them, I can use UU. Double U is the version of the Uber key that gives me all my adjustments. So I adjusted feather and shift edge. Let me reset feather. And now that problem is gone. And I had initially feathered it more heavily to get rid of some of this noise. So I might want a little more feather. But it's a difficulty with these particular tools that the amounts don't really correspond to other tools, at least that I'm used to. So I'll just turn this on and off for a second. So yeah, the decontamination is doing a really nice job here. I don't need the heavier feather. In fact, I'm seeing a gap close again, so I'm just going to back off again and leave it something like that for now.
Now, I encourage you to be a perfectionist and notice what was not right and desirable about what you got from that tool. All the little nooks and crannies, the corners that kind of got filled in. And that's often the case with these automated tools. They'll be great, but details. So use them, but don't rely on them too heavily and lie to yourself that they're working when really they're not.
Watching this again in motion, this little section of it, the legs look great. I see some problems with the hand. And I don't like the way the mat is looking. So I'm going to start over with that one. So for that purpose, I'll go ahead and rename this layer legs. We'll just draw a little mat, maybe down to there. We'll go down under the mat border just a bit. Make sure we're clear over here. Let me actually just run right kind of along there. Now I want another copy of that layer, and to be safe, I'm gonna go grab that pre-comp again. Command / places it back in the comp, and the two things that need to be adjusted are position P and scale S. Copy those, paste them here, and we'll call this mat, M-A-T, not M-A-T-T-E. Now we're gonna fast forward through me just masking this thing out. One quick note, with any mask that you draw, what you want to do is be consistent about what you're calling your edge. I tend to look for the boundary between where the pixels look solid colored and when they look semi-opaque, and I try to just split that. Not sure what to do about this shadow down here. I think I'll take some of it. And if you miss any spots where you need a point, you can always go back and add them. So now, having done that, I notice a few areas where the mat doesn't quite line up, leaving some gaps. So I'm just going in and making sure I fill those in to get a nice, smooth mat here. And to achieve the whole point of having done this, probably going to want to feather it just a bit. I think I mentioned before, my standard feather in HD for anything is 2 pixels. And the reason for that is even when you see something that is a hard line, there's some softness to it. Now, since I zoomed in here, look at that bright line there. Well, before we look at that, let's just examine this mat again in motion. Got a little mat problem there. I think if I go back to my legs layer, I'm noticing a little bit of leftover white in this mat, and I think it's coming from the legs layer. So now I'm going to go back and painstakingly adjust the mat and legs layer to make sure I nail that. Now, I know this can get a little tedious, and I just want to drive home the point that you need to be kind of anal retentive about this stuff in order for it to work. So back to the white line that we noticed. When there are things that are just from the real world that are in the frame, I tend to consider them part of the real world and I don't get rid of them. That said, these are looking like a mistake because they're right next to the thing that everybody's going to know or at least suspect that we added to the frame. They're just kind of calling themselves out. Now, if the client hadn't positioned the talent right there, I might even just scoot that talent layer down so the matte covers it, but there's no reason to be that lazy. This is going to give us an opportunity to actually do a little paint work.
So people talk about roto and paint as if that is one entire art and they're sort of equally useful. And as cool as paint is, especially if a tablet and you just go in and make something look so much better with a single stroke, keep in mind, I want you to keep this in your mind, paint is the tool of last resort. The issue is that unless it's going to be completely straightforward, it will get very complicated to use. Now that's particularly true in After Effects, which doesn't make it easy to, say, track a clone, like if you wanted to track a clone source and then track something that you're cloning it to, that turns into kind of a painstaking process. There are expressions and scripts that can help you, but even if that weren't the case, even if you're in like, I don't know, the Flame, which is much more oriented around working with a pen and brushing things in, you still pretty much, if you're just hand painting, that's gonna be the most work. So this is a case where it's gonna be the perfect solution, but those are relatively rare in my experience.
In After Effects, you don't paint directly in the composition. You actually have to double click the layer in the timeline to work in the layer viewer. So we're gonna want one stroke that just takes care, or one set of strokes that takes care of the whole shot. And since the shot doesn't move, we're gonna be able to do that. And for that, I'm gonna go home key to go to the beginning. Actually, that went back to the beginning of the layer itself, but I just wanna go to the beginning of the comp. I will pick the clone tool here. Now, I have paint and brush settings to think about, and I'm just gonna make sure that the hardness is at 0, which it is. I want a soft edge. I can size the brush the same way I did the rotor brush, just holding down Command. So I'm actually gonna go pretty small on this brush because I don't wanna do more than I need. I wanna make sure that in paint, this is set to constant. So you can do single frame or some other options, but I wanna just make one stroke and have it automatically continue throughout the entire layer. And so now I'm gonna look for something that corresponds to this tile right here, and I think this one down here will be perfect. What I like to do is line things up. So I've got it right at the center of my circle there. I hold down Option to sample. Alt on Windows, but you knew that. I'm gonna go up here and look for what I guess to be the corresponding spot. Now they're a little bit different in scale, but I'm not gonna worry about that. It's hard to tell up close how good a job I did there. It's pretty good. I'm gonna hold Shift key, just like in Photoshop, to go straight across. You know, the fact that I'm looking for it means I'm more likely to see things here, but they're easy to get rid of. And now nobody would know. We know, but nobody else would know. Over here, let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and pick something nearby, just so the color and lighting of the floor is similar. Same trick. Looks like I got it. Go over here, from there, down to there. Now, of course, you have other tools like the eraser, and you can continue to touch up as needed. So I can go elsewhere and add strokes here and there. Now, for the casual observer, we have effectively erased it. I'll use the Uber key again, UU, to just show what's down here. Actually, it showed everything, but there are my paint strokes. And notice each one's got all its own controls. So in fact, you could go in and edit these after the fact. And one nifty thing about Paint is you get the grain for free because it is cloning the moving footage. So you want to make sure, just go through the clip and make sure nothing passed in front of the light or any other giveaways that would mess it up. Not the case here.
So the best thing about Paint in After Effects is that it's non-destructive. Now, I just showed you the right way basically to do that operation. But if I looked later and it turned out my stroke was too small, I could make it larger. If it needed to be softer, I could soften it, change the hardness setting. And if I'd made a mistake and either painted on single frames instead of constant, which continues throughout the rest of the layer, or if I had started somewhere then the beginning and so my strokes didn't kick in until the middle of the shot, which happens all the time, I can go in and select the strokes, and I didn't show you this, but you can click and drag on the end of the stroke just like you would with a layer and change the duration of it. So the endpoint, you could just drag those back. You click a bunch of them and do them all at the same time. So that's really useful compared to, say, Photoshop, where it's pretty much all you can do is undo. It has its advantages. Some of the brushes are a little more elegant, but I think the killer app here is just that you're free to edit these after the fact.
I've added a duplicate layer and named it hair. And once again, I'm going to use the extract tool. I think it's the last time I'm going to actually approach things this way. And this should be really easy just getting that hair because most everything is lighter than it is. That's what I wanted. I can add a little bit of thresholding, but because I'm using Refine Matte tools again, I don't want much of that either. Let's just mask this out. See how that holds up. Now, because her ponytail is swinging back and forth as her body moves, I'm gonna need to add a hand animated mask here to just separate those two. I wanna make sure that I get the top of her head and the ponytail, but not the shoulder, which needs a completely different matte setting. So a little bit of hand animation is going to give me this garbage matte that I need here. And with that done, let's check out the quality of the matte we're getting just for the hair. So extra thresholding is just going to introduce more white. And then if I clamp it down more, I can get close. But it gets pretty clumpy looking. So instead, let's use the other RotoBrush-based matte tool, Refine Soft Matte. So the difference here is this is the equivalent of the Refine Edge tool. So turn the mask back on. Option 4 on the keyboard is going to let me isolate just the alpha channel and see the matte alone. Okay, it's definitely choking in quite a bit. So we could shift the edge back out. Just keeping an eye where we're starting to get fringing. Maybe there's good. And I think something like that is going to be excellent. It's a little weird to see her kind of disembodied this way, but just look at it like a professional. And we'll get to adding the face and the torso next. Well, for now, I think that's really good.
All right, so it turns out that to get all this lovely goodness that we were seeing in the previous lesson with the hair details, we don't even need RotoBrush for that. What we really need is these Refine Soft Matte tools, which are built into RotoBrush, but you can also use them with any matte. Now, do you want to use them with every matte? No. They are going to soften other mattes that don't want to be soft. So this is really a very specialized case, but the thing to keep in your mind is you're not stuck with RotoBrush if you still want all of that automated goodness to get the detail out of that matte.
You're not living in the movie Groundhog Day. I have once again added the layer, this time labeling it face, because guess what? The next thing I want to do is add that in. Now, you may be aware that there is a mask tracker built into After Effects, and I imagine you've even given it a try. And let's just see, because as her face moves around here, it sure would be nice to track it. So I'm going to go for this profile right here, where we see kind of the most of her face. And because we're going to just try this out, I'm going to be a little bit quick about drawing this in. Come around here, leave a generous amount. I don't really need the neck. All right, the way this works, if you haven't used it, is just basically to open the tracker with the mask selected and start tracking. Now, already it has slipped off, but the way that it's working gives us some indication that one thing it's not doing is following the contour of the face. So clearly, these points are not trying to stay with where they started. So now she's moved her head back around to where it's lining up with the mask. And if we look in here, single U key shows me those keyframes back to where we started. We could also track backwards to get the rest. So it looks to me like what it's actually doing is averaging all of the information inside the mask and just kind of going with that. And the result, really not that helpful, particularly because there is a mask on every frame. So that means any edit I make on one frame is not going to carry over to the other ones. So really, this is kind of a worst case scenario. Now, there are scripts out there that would allow you to work on multiple mask keyframes and so on, but I'm not even talking about that. So let's just turn that off. In fact, let's go ahead and delete it. I don't think I'm going to need that. Fortunately for us, there's a completely different option. For that, I'm going to go to the Effect menu, to Boris FX Mocha, Mocha AECC, and click on this Mocha icon. And here we have it. If this is your first look at Mocha AE, isn't this exciting? It's completely unfamiliar. Relax, we are going to take this one step at a time. So let's start with what seems to be familiar. We have some play controls down here. There seem to also be some things that look like play controls over here and over here. But these ones right in the center are the ones that actually control playback. The zoom tool works a little bit differently than After Effects. So I actually hold down Z and scrub, and then I can use my middle mouse button to switch to the hand tool. The X key will give you the hand tool, but if you want to do it that way, you need to hold down X. We're now looking at the face, and I'm looking for specifically an area of the face where we can see all of her profile. And actually, we're right on a pretty good spot. So by all of her profile, I mean her nose, all of her features. To get started, I'm going to choose this tool here. It's an X with a pen. Now, if I click and hold here, you can see there are a few different variations on this tool. The one marked B is a Bezier tool. So that's more similar to what you're used to in After Effects. But I highly recommend you instead start with the X-Spline tool and use it basically always. It's very different and it will take some getting used to, but I don't even think I need to explain it a whole lot other than as we go. So I'm going to start out super loose and just click around where I see details on her face, but I'm going to do it without actually paying any attention really to the edges. So I'm actually going to go outside of her face. Watch this. So go here. She's got a chin, indentation there, lips, indentation above the lips, cheekbone, bottom of nose, top of nose. I'll sort of go across the eye, eyebrow ridge, forehead, top of head. We'll do one more over here, and let's do one over here. Now notice I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the edge. I didn't conform to it. I'm sort of outside of it over here, inside of it over here. I'm not going to worry about that. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and kick off a track and see what happens. I can track in reverse or forward direction. And you can see the T in these play controls. So now we've learned that the second set of play controls over here has to do specifically with tracking. All right, so that's all we know at this point. Let's give it a try. Well, it's not really doing such a hot job. There is something that by default is not enabled, and I want it to be enabled. I'm not going to undo because I don't need to. Instead, I'll go back to where I started, which is this keyframe. To skip right to it, I'll go to this third set of play controls, which is actually a shortcut to keyframes, of which I have one. This green flag here is a keyframe, and I set it when I drew the mask. The only thing I'm going to change is to enable perspective. Now, perspective is for situations where the plane is turning toward or away from you, which is exactly what her head is doing here. So let's now just try the same track again. It's going to overwrite the previous keyframe information, and that looks a bit better. It's not so great right here where the arm moves in, but for now, let's just go with that. And let's now go back to that keyframe and track in the other direction. Now, you're probably fretting. This doesn't look right. It's doing something, but it's definitely not tracking the edge. That is not what Mocha does. Instead, let's take a look at what Mocha actually does do. And to do that, I'm going to, with the layer selected, click on this Show Grid button here and just zoom out just a little bit and press play once again. Play, of course, always loops backward and forward, so really if you just want to look at the whole clip, it doesn't really matter if you choose backward or forward. Now this looks a lot like a 3D track. It's following the side of the face very faithfully through what appears to be 3D space, but in fact, that is just an optical illusion. What Mocha is actually doing is picking up on all the detail within this shape without regard for edges or 3 dimensions, and essentially changing all of these factors, scale, rotation, translation, but also skew and perspective based on what it picks up. So that's giving us the illusion that this is a 3D track, when in fact it's something much more useful.
Now, as you know, After Effects is only kind of a 3D application. Really, I think of it as 2.5D. And what you see here is a perfect example of 2.5D looking a lot like 3D. That plane that's tracked on the side of the face is moving around and might fool you into thinking that we're object tracking. Object tracking is when you have a 3D object and you get a perfect dimensional track of it. There's no tool for that in After Effects. The camera tracker is a true 3D tracker. So sorry, After Effects, I called you 2.5D, but that's real 3D, although you're often tracking 2D planes into your 3D space. But in this case, though, all we can really do with the 3D tracker, the camera tracker, is scene tracking. And that's not what we want. The camera's not moving here, so it wouldn't help us. So this is nothing like 3D tracking, actually, except for the fact that that plane, as it skews through space and changes perspective, the perspective is what we see when we see 3D rotate and change its orientation on a flat screen. And in the end, it's always 2D.
All right, we don't need the grid anymore, and turning it off gives us an opportunity to visit a couple more areas of the basic interface. We're looking at Essentials mode right now. We're going to just stay in this simplified view for the time being. I can turn off Show Grid down here, so already we've got redundancy of these 3 icons down here in the lower left. And the other 2 have to do with surface tracking, but we're not actually trying to apply anything to that surface. So we're actually done with that portion of the UI. And then up here is my layer view. It's very similar to the layer view in the After Effects timeline. And I'll just rename the layer by double clicking on it. And that looks good. I'm working in a plugin and I'm free to save at any time I want. Because as you notice, this plugin looks an awful lot like a separate application, and it has a file menu
where you can save. It also has a bunch of other menus with all kinds of options that we don't really need to worry about right now. So you can save as you go. I just did. Or you can just close Mocha by clicking on the red button here, and it will give you a save dialog at that point. It doesn't really matter which one you do. Ultimately, this is going to be saved when you save your After Effects project. So just keep that in mind. If you make changes you don't want, you can click the red button to close and don't save. But make sure you save the After Effects project and don't rely on it being saved just by having worked on it within this essentially plugin. I know it's a little strange, especially if you've used Mocha in the past when it was a standalone application, but that's the way that it is with the Boris Mocha plugin, and it's actually a good thing. Okay, let's go back to our main keyframe here. So at this point, what I can do is refine my mask a little bit. And the important thing here is that I did put all the points where I need them. So let's now just go ahead and adjust this. So I want to use this pick tool, which has a shortcut, to adjust the points. The way explain points work is kind of different. And let me just adjust a few of them as is here. So I'm just conforming to the edge. And then when I get to the, let's say, okay, to this eye socket here, that looks like a very sharp corner. And I'd like it to be more of a gentle curve, maybe up at the nose too. The way I adjust the curvature is with this handle. Now, notice that the selection area is no longer aligned with the point. So I can tighten it to a corner or loosen it to a very loose curve. But if I want it to still conform to the nose, I have to actually move that point in and out. So that is actually quite different from Bezier's and might seem a little bit frustrating at first, but honestly, it is actually the way professional roto tools almost all work because it's so loose and flexible and you're not fiddling with Bezier handles. Okay, I went ahead and changed this shape on this one layer. Now let's go somewhere else in the timeline where we're far away from the shape fitting the face. You could even go to the very end. Let's just do that. I don't have a shortcut, by the way, to skip to the end, so I'll just use my scroll wheel to go to that frame. I believe I could also type in the frame over here. So there are a lot of things wrong, and they have to do with the overall shape. Unlike After Effects, I don't need to select the overall shape. It's already selected, and you can see this fine tool around the edges. It kind of disappears in the white. But if I just pull out here, I'm going to be able to kind of make gross adjustments of this mask. So that was scaling. I could also rotate it a bit. And then when I see the 4-pointed arrow, I can move it. And that got it closer. Now let's just get it into place. So I'd like a more curved chin at this point. It's already not too soon to kind of decide where I'm going to be at relative to my edge. And I think where I want to be is to the inside of where any of the thresholding happens, any of the semi-transparent pixels. And the reason for that is the background is white, which is really going to stand out. So the biggest danger with this matte is popping white details. And that's what I need to ultimately avoid. So it's never too soon to start deciding where my edge boundary is going to be. Okay, I'm going to press play again to just preview. Well, there's still a big problem. But let's just do the thing we can do with keyframes and continue to fix it. One thing you'll notice, well, let me just fix this one really quick and then I'll point this out. So I'll just move this roughly into place. Something very challenging about this particular track, in fact, it's in some ways the most challenging part of Roto in this scene, is that her facial features appear and disappear continuously as she moves her head and talks. In fact, while tracking the head is not a big deal,
getting all of these details happening with a consistent edge is going to be a bit of work. So at some point soon, we're going to switch to high speed and you're just going to watch me work on this mat. But for now, I want you to notice that I dramatically changed that one frame. Let's just focus on the area I've adjusted and not the beginning. And now it's a lot closer. And in fact, the fact that I adjusted that one frame out in the middle, it didn't mess with the actual track. So the most important thing to understand here is the original track is still intact. Let me do this again. I'll move this into place, kind of massage things here. So unlike the After Effects masking tool where each frame is a keyframe and therefore any adjustment I make to one frame really has no bearing and just throws off the track, in this case, I'm making a whole set of keyframes that are separate from the ones that created the track. And that's super significant because that's how we're going to avoid creating a keyframe on every frame. In fact, far from it. So right now it is quite a bit of work, and it's really hard to tell how much more work it's going to be yet, isn't it? Again, I'm going to go back to this first keyframe and let's just see where we're at. We now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes. And with just 5 keyframes, we're very close. Let's look at the beginning of the shot. I can also drag my timeline indicator back. Now where the arm comes in and jostles the track, I'm actually going to go ahead and bracket this off and not include that part. And we'll handle that separately later. I certainly could handle it, but just for the purposes of the exercise and the different approaches we can use, I'm going to not do that. And so I definitely need another keyframe here. Kind of a mess, or they seem to be, but again, it's no different from what we've done anywhere else. I'm free to adjust the tension on the individual points as needed, and that will in between. All of the controls that you're used to about how things in between aren't really going to end up being so completely necessary in here. At some point later, I will show you what things look like behind the scenes. But for right now, I'm more interested in working with this tool without actually worrying about any of that. So now my work area is starting at frame 9. We have 6 keyframes. And I would say that we have roto that, while on any given frame has some definite problems, is about 80% of the way there. One difficulty about working the way we are right now is we can't see the background. And so, for example, on this frame where I just stopped, there is definitely going to be some white popping through. And that, as I said, is the biggest issue. So, for example, I'm not going to worry that her eyelash is getting cut out. It doesn't actually matter very much because of the size she's going to be and the busyness of the background. I don't think anybody's going to watch this commercial and think, well, I would have gone to the yoga studio, but her eyelash. So instead, let's just focus on keeping a consistent edge and freely staying within about the boundary that you see here. So it's varying quite a bit, and it's a problem where we're definitely getting white in there. Now, there's something that will help us see that white, and so I want to introduce that now. To do that, I'm going to switch views. Under this view menu, I'm going to go to Roto, the Roto layout. And it's pretty similar, but it took away some things and introduced some others. So we're just going to pay a brief visit in here. For whatever reason, the tracking controls are now down here at the bottom. It looks like you can now track frame by frame. Those are these extra tools here. But mostly I'm interested in these buttons that appeared up here at the top. In particular, I'm interested in this button, Show Layer Mats. When I enable it, I see now a matte applied to this layer that's highlighted, which is great, or it's almost great, but it's a white matte over a white background. Let's see if we can customize it a little bit. So I'm going to choose a nice soothing blue, and it disappeared. I'm hoping that by the time you see this lesson, this bug will have been corrected. But in fact, you have to type in an alpha channel value of 255, or you could do a thresholded value. But as you can see, 255 still lets the background show through. And otherwise, you're not going to see your color within the mask, even though we've enabled it. The other thing I'm going to do is invert it, because what I want to see is the white leaking through. I'll go back to Essentials and go to this Layer Properties tab here. So you can see my new endpoint of 9 set here. And then Blend Mode. I'm going to temporarily change this to Invert. If I forget and leave it there, I can fix it later. Everything's flexible. But ultimately, I do actually want a selection of the face and the side of the head. But right now, what I want is this clear view, as you see here, of that white. Now it just really pops, and it's easy to see where the problem is. So I'll just bring in the handle there, or why don't I undo that and just stick to where my keyframes already are and make those perfectly consistent as a starting point. Actually, I'm going to go into where we're going to go fast through this section. And what you're going to see me do is work on these keyframes and then find the in-between points that are furthest away and fix those until such time as I pretty much narrowed this down to what I consider to be a good roto. One note, there's a keyboard shortcut for next and previous keyframe, command up and down arrow, so I will be using those.
I'm pretty confident in assuming this is not your first time seeing in-between framing, but that's what you're watching. And probably, I'm also guessing some of you are pretty damn good at this and may even be going like, oh, come on, you didn't need that many keyframes. That's fine. All I'm doing is going to two keyframes that are correct and then finding the place in between them that is the furthest off. And then if that extra keyframe solves everything in between, great. And if not, I repeat the process again and look for the keyframe between the new sets, that is the one before and the one after the one I added, that are off. And eventually you do find you have enough keyframes without having to put a keyframe on every frame in almost any case I've ever come up against.
I'm zoomed in here a little bit more so we can just review what we've got and critique it with a spacebar preview. And you might first look at this and see everything that's wrong with it. There's quite a bit of hair still outside the mask over here, and the chin consistency with the way the chin is could be better. On the other hand, I don't look at the masked head and really see those problems much. And I think this is even in overlap area where a different mask is going to take care of it. So this I'm not going to worry about as much. Overall, the question more is her face deformed? Are the missing eyelashes a problem? And that's all remembering that we're at something like 400 or 800% right now. I'm not sure. So overall, I'm looking for things that would distract me in a wide shot, even keeping in mind that I'm looking at her face, and I'm pretty happy with it. So at any point, or now that I'm pretty happy with that, I can Command S to save it and even close Mocha.
All right. I'm not going to apologize for my lack of roto skills, but it has been a little while. I don't think I'm doing anything actually wrong, but what happens once you get into practice is you just get more efficient, you see things faster, and you do less. And I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle here, which is okay for us learning. And if you enjoy roto, you're going to become really good and very efficient compared to what I'm doing. Now, all that aside, one thing I want you to notice is how flexible Mocha is about letting me change keyframes and be loose. Think about After Effects. When you change a mask keyframe, you're changing so many things about that mask. Like if you tracked it in, you'd have a keyframe on every frame. And in this case, you're not stuck that way. And so I'm not having to go back and fix things that I've broken by setting my keyframes. So that's one thing that's really good about this tool.
There are a few ways to apply the matte in the After Effects timeline. I'll twirl down matte, and the first option here is to view what I've done. And I can see an issue, which is that I neglected to turn off invert mats. Let's just go back and take care of that. The layer selected under layer properties, I'll just uncheck invert. And when I close, I get the save option. Now let's take another look. That looks better. So now we can apply this mat, and this indeed is how one could preview and even use the mat. The only main danger to that is there's no way to adjust it. So you can't feather it, expand it, do any of the things you can do with the regular mouse controls, and it won't respond to motion blur, which may not be a huge concern here. It's looking good, by the way. But let's not apply it that way. That's a fine way to preview. But in fact, what I'm going to do is click down here to create AE masks. And now in my timeline, I have keyframes for every frame except the part that we bracketed off at the beginning. And as I said, with motion blur enabled for both the layer and the composition, any motion blur that there should be for that layer is applied. Now I know it's a little weird looking at this disembodied head, and you have to ignore those first few frames. Other than that, we are looking quite good and ready to move on.
So is roto an art, or is it just right or wrong? It's just a thing that's either accurate or inaccurate. Well, I can tell you when the day comes that the machines just do all of this for us, it won't be an art anymore. But with a human doing it, there is an art to it. It's the art of deciding what you have to really focus on and what you don't. And really the ultimate art is in keeping the viewer from being distracted by something wrong with the roto. So is that an art like creating a really awesome original painting? Maybe not, but there is an art to it, I swear.
You're probably wondering, why did I leave her torso-less? So let's now take care of that. The reason is that tracking her back is going to be a bit more challenging for reasons that you will see shortly if you don't already. Now let's just study the motion here for a moment, just of the back. So what's happening in the upper back is independent from the lower back, which is fairly stable. Keeping in mind we are getting rid of this device on her hip. But then there being the issue that the arm reaches right into the area that we want to track into. So I'm actually going to try and track that arm first. So here I'm using the same technique as I used with the face. I have an X spline. I've drawn a shape around the arm, and I'm tracking it forward and backward. Sometimes the track shape actually has to be updated to fix the track, and that's what I've done here. Now I'm going to rename the layer arm and click the gear icon to tell Mocha not to track that mask anymore. You'll see why.
So again, we're learning about the flexibility of Mocha. It starts with a track, which may or may not nail the shape, probably not. And sometimes the benefit is just psychological. Then there's keyframing that to get it more accurate. And that's separate from the track. And then I can attach a separate shape and keyframe that. So in fact, I can leave the fine detail work for that third layer without having to change anything about the first two.
And I'm going to be tracking another layer. I'm adding another layer. And anytime you do that, you need to be conscious of whether you are doing any retracking, which we are not. And often you are not. Most often the case you're not. So again, that was this cog right here that determines whether we're tracking or not. In fact, I can also turn the visibility of this layer off and make it as if I'm starting over. This time I'm going to start when her back is just flat and open. And I don't really need to worry about meeting the exact contours of the back. What I'm really trying to do is just get that area inclusive. And there's no clear method to how I'm doing this. I'm really just guessing. What I'm looking for is detail that I think is going to be trackable. I'll name this layer back, move it below the arm. And moving it below the arm layer is very important in this case because what that does is tell Mocha to use that top layer as a holdout mat, meaning ignore the pixels within that arm layer, which would throw the track off. This is how you tell Mocha to ignore overlapping motion like that. Turn the visibility of the arm back on. All right, so first of all, let's just track backwards before the arm comes through. See how we did with this selection. And look, I forgot to turn on perspective. Now, if you screw up, you don't need to undo. In a case like that, I'm just gonna turn it on and retrack it. Didn't make a huge difference in that section, but I think it will. Okay, that looked pretty good. Now, before I go on, you may be wondering, wait a minute, the mask you drew was pretty sloppy. It doesn't seem to match anything that we're actually gonna be rotoing. There's a reason for that, which I'll get to. First, let's see if we can get a good track. Okay, that was close, but things got messed up a little bit. Let's see if we can figure out why. So the hand did escape a little bit from the mask. Believe it or not, that could indeed make a difference. So I've adjusted and fixed the arm mask. So now let's retrack and see what happens. It's better, but something's still going on there. And just to reiterate, this is the whack-a-mole process of roto. You solve one problem and another one pops up and you solve that one. Okay, that's closer to what I was after. Let's just look at a grid. So it looks to me like we tracked the basic motion of the back. And part of what's going on down here is, again, that the lower back isn't twisting as much as the upper back. So it kind of had to make a choice there, which is fine.